I called 911 to order a giant pizza on Christmas Eve. But what made the police go cold wasn't the pizza request. It was what they found. When they walked through the door, the first ring made my fingers tremble. By the second, I pressed the receiver tighter to my ear, glancing once at the closed door across the kitchen. He was still upstairs, at least I thought he was. Noon Hunter Telft. What's your emergency? I hesitated. My voice came out small, too soft. Hi. I'd like to order a pizza. Large. Extra pepperoni. There was silence on the line. I could hear the dispatcher shifting. I imagined her in some warm control center, her night shift, humming with drunk drivers and false alarms, probably thinking this was another prank. A lonely woman trying to be funny on Christmas Eve. I'm sorry, ma'am. You've dialed emergency services. I know I cut in sharper than I intended. I softened quickly. Please. I want it delivered fast. I'm at 2449 Echo Ridge Lane. Side door is unlocked. Please don't knock. Another pause. Then her voice dropped a notch lower, cautious. Ma'am, is someone threatening you? I kept my eyes on the door. No. I just don't want anyone else to know. He doesn't like visitors. Are you in danger now? My breath caught. I glanced at the clock above the sink. 6:43 p.m. The only sound was the faint ticking and the hum of the oven I'd cracked open to keep warm. I couldn't feel my toes anymore. I'm fine, I said, as steadily as I could manage. Just very, very hungry. And alone. There was a shift in the dispatcher's tone. Sharper now. Okay, Lenora. Help is on the way. Please stay on the line with me. I didn't remember giving her my name. Maybe I had. Maybe it was in the database. It didn't matter. Footsteps creaked above me. I dropped the phone into my lap and cradled it under the edge of my sweater. Just the pizza, I murmured. Don't forget the pepperoni. The line went quiet. She was still there. I knew she was. But I didn't dare speak again. The footsteps stopped. I listened to the floor groan as Bryce moved back toward his room. The air smelled like burnt toast and must. I shifted slightly on the hard wooden chair, the cold biting up through the soles of my feet. Behind me, the old pizza flyer still clung to the fridge with a heart-shaped magnet. The number circled in red. I hadn't touched it in years. I reached for it, as the line clicked off, and the house sank into silence again. Upstairs, the door closed. I waited. And then, I remembered the first time he came back home. It was a Thursday when Bryce showed up on my porch. 2 duffel bags slung over his shoulder, and that old half-smile I hadn't seen in years pasted across his face like it still worked on me. Hey, Mom, he said, voice low, almost boyish. Didn't think I'd be back here again, but he glanced at the sky like it owed him something. Life's been ticking a little harder than usual. He looked thinner than I remembered, beard-patchy eyes, bloodshot but alert. I stepped aside without asking any questions. That's what you do when your child, no matter how old, comes home, looking like he's trying not to fall apart. The last time I'd seen him, he'd stormed out after a Thanksgiving dinner that turned into a shouting match about finances. That was 2 years ago. He hadn't called since. We sat at the kitchen table later that night. I made tea. He didn't touch it. I'm between jobs, he said. IT company downsized, didn't see it coming. I was crashing at Mason's place. But he's got his kid now. Long story. I just need a few weeks to reset. His voice softened when he said it, like the word reset was some kind of magic trick. I nodded slowly, even though part of me bristled. He'd always been good at smoothing over the truth, but something in me still wanted to believe this time would be different. You can take the guest room, I said. You'll need to help with groceries if you're staying, and clean up after yourself. I'm not 20 anymore. Of course, he said quickly. I want to contribute. Really, I'm not here to mooch. I just needed somewhere that didn't feel like failure. That line didn't feel like failure clung to me. It sounded rehearsed, but I let it sit between us like an unwrapped gift. I wanted to hold on to the idea that he was trying. For the first week he was sweet, brought in firewood without me asking, took out the trash, even fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom I'd been ignoring. He made jokes at dinner, made himself coffee in the morning, and asked about my old garden like he used to care. I let myself believe we were finding our rhythm again, that maybe this was a small redemption neither of us had dared name. I didn't ask about the past, I didn't ask about the drinking, or the divorce, or the things I'd read between the lines of the last Christmas card he never sent. It was just nice to have company. Then one morning I found the medicine cabinet rearranged. My blood pressure pills were in a different bottle. The refill dates didn't match. And when I asked Bryce about it, he smiled like I'd forgotten something obvious. "That's what I'm here for, Mom. You don't need to worry about any of that anymore." He patted my hand before walking out of the room, leaving the cupboard open behind him. At first it was little things. Bryce began setting my pills out before I woke up. He lined them up in a plastic tray I didn't remember buying, labeled Monday through Sunday. Like I couldn't read the bottles myself. "I figured this was easier," he said, clearing breakfast plates I hadn't finished. "You've got enough to think about without counting pills every morning." He smiled when he said it. Polite, helpful, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Then came the electric bill. I'd set it on the counter ready to drop in the mailbox, but the next day it was gone. I assumed I'd mailed it and forgotten. A week later, when I mentioned needing to pay the water bill, he waved a hand. "Handled it," he said. "You don't need to stress over this stuff anymore. Let me take it off your plate." My phone disappeared 2 days later. I'd left it charging in the hallway near the window, the only spot that got signal. When I asked, he told me it had a software issue, and he'd taken it to the repair shop. "Just a couple days," he said. "They're running behind holiday season." Without it, the house felt strangely quiet. No calls from the pharmacy, no check-in from Rita across the street. I tried not to let it bother me. I had the landline after all. But the landline only rang when someone was selling something, and I never heard it ring at all that week. Bryce started locking the front door from the inside with the chain latch, the kind I couldn't reach without standing on a stool. "Just to keep things safe," he explained, with porch pirates and break-ins and all that. I laughed weakly and nodded, even as I started noticing how often he left with the keys in his pocket. I once reached for my coat to go mail a letter and found the door wouldn't budge. "Where you headed?" he asked from the couch. Remote in hand. "Just the mailbox," I said. "I'll take it later," he said. "Sit down, Mom. You shouldn't be walking on icy sidewalks." The next day he rearranged the hallway closet. My boots and wool coat were moved to the attic. I didn't ask why. I just stood there, staring at the empty hook, wondering when my own house had stopped feeling like mine. The kettle whistled from the kitchen, and I turned toward the sound, already bracing for what else had changed. The tone shifted faster than I expected. Bryce stopped making small talk over dinner. Some nights there was no dinner at all, just a plastic container of rice or half a sandwich left on the counter, without a word. I wasn't sure if he forgot, or if forgetting had become the point. When I asked about my next doctor's appointment, he didn't look up from his phone. "They do everything online now," he muttered. "Telehealth, remote diagnostics. You don't need to go in for every little thing." "My blood pressure's been spiking," I said gently. "It's been years since I missed a check-in." He shrugged. "Stress does that. Just relax." He started locking the door from the outside when he left. I only realized it the third time I tried to follow him out, to ask what groceries we needed. The knob turned, but the door wouldn't give. From the window I watched him drive away, not even glancing back. The thermostat began fluctuating. Some nights were so cold I had to sleep in my robe under 2 blankets. Other nights I woke drenched in sweat, the heat blasting until the walls felt damp. When I mentioned it, he said it was an old system and promised to check it. He never did. One afternoon I woke early from a nap and heard his voice through the floorboards. He was pacing in the room below mine, talking in a tone too smooth to trust. "No, she's compliant. Hasn't missed a dose. Symptoms have worsened, more confusion, some physical decline. Should qualify by next quarter, easy? Yes, I have everything on paper." I didn't breathe. I sat still on the edge of the bed, heart pounding, the blanket bunched in my lap like a shield. The words tangled in my head, none of them making sense until they all did. Later I opened the kitchen drawer where I used to keep the house keys. Empty. The grocery list I'd written had been replaced by a schedule in Bryce's handwriting: dosage times meal allowances, observation notes. It looked clinical, like a case file. That night he brought home soup from a gas station and handed it to me without meeting my eyes. I held the warm plastic container in both hands, not hungry, just grateful to feel something with weight. Upstairs the bathroom mirror had fogged over from the shower. I wiped it clean and barely recognized the woman staring back. Pale skin, sunken cheeks, hair thinned at the part. I touched my reflection, like I could smooth it into something familiar again. I didn't know if I was getting sicker, or if someone needed me to look that way. It started with the mail. I'd noticed the pile growing on the hallway table tucked beneath an outdated newspaper and a grocery flyer. When Bryce stepped out for what he called errands, I shuffled through the stack. Half the envelopes were addressed to me, but none had been opened. Several had red stamps. Important. Time sensitive. Action required. One had the Medicare logo in the corner. I tucked that one beneath my sweater and carried it to the bedroom like contraband. Inside was a notice about a claim I hadn't submitted, referencing treatments I'd never received. Durable medical equipment. In-home assessments. My name, my ID number, but nothing I'd authorized. I waited until dinner, hoping to ask calmly, choosing my words the way I used to when he was 10 and on edge. Bryce. I said, I think something's wrong with the insurance. There's mail I haven't seen. He didn't let me finish. Jesus, Mom. I told you not to mess with that. He slammed the refrigerator shut hard enough to rattle the magnets. You're confused again. That's exactly why I've been managing things. I'm not confused, I said, more softly than I intended. I want to understand. He stepped closer. Not threatening, but towering in that way that erased space. You don't need to understand. You need to rest. Let me take care of it. That night, I waited until he was asleep to check the desk drawers in the office. In the bottom one, under a pile of old receipts, I found a notarized form declaring Bryce as my medical proxy. Dated 2 weeks ago, my signature was shaky slanted. I had no memory of signing it. In the same drawer was a folder labeled Continuing Care Plan. Pages of checklists, daily logs in Bryce's handwriting marking changes in appetite, signs of disorientation, inconsistent speech. I stared at them, blinking hard. He'd documented me into dependency. Downstairs the floor creaked under his steps. I slid the folder back where it was, shut the drawer quietly, and sat at the edge of the bed, my hands cold and open in my lap. When I heard him coming up the stairs, I pulled the blanket over my knees and leaned back into the pillow, eyes closed, pretending to sleep. It was Christmas Eve when he handed me the phone. He'd brought home greasy takeout in a brown paper sack. 2 containers, one half full of noodles, the other something unrecognizable. He didn't speak much, just placed the bag on the table and tapped beside it. You want something different? He asked, his voice light like he was being generous. You can make one call. Pick somewhere cheap and fast. My hands shook as I reached for the phone. It was my old flip model, the one I used to keep in my purse. I hadn't seen it in over a month. The screen was cracked now, but it lit up when I opened it. He stood behind me, arms crossed. I nodded, trying to act casual. Okay, I said. I think I still remember the number. I did. It wasn't for a restaurant. I dialed 911. Noon Hunter Telft. What is your emergency? I kept my voice steady. Hi. I'd like to order a pizza for delivery. Large. Extra pepperoni. A pause. Bryce narrowed his eyes slightly, but I smiled at the phone like I was placing a regular order. Ma'am, this is emergency services. Yes, I said, still smiling. And I'd really like it hot. Not cold like last time. Extra fast delivery. The dispatcher hesitated. Are you in danger? I inhaled slowly. Please don't forget the pizza. And please don't knock when you arrive. Bryce tilted his head. You said, extra pepperoni? I nodded. And no sausage. Just pepperoni. He seemed to relax, walked back into the kitchen. The sink started running behind me. On the line, the dispatcher spoke again. Her voice quieter now. Is someone there with you? I kept my voice light. Yes, he's in the kitchen. We're sending help now. Stay on the line. I set the phone down on the counter. Careful not to hang up. My hands were damp. I pressed them into my lap. The water turned off. Bryce returned with a dish towel and a soda. He set it in front of me and said nothing. I didn't touch it. Instead, I watched the blinking light on the phone, steady and small, pulsing, like a signal in the dark. Outside, snow had started falling against the window, soft and slow. I wrapped my hands around the paper cup and waited for a sound I didn't yet believe would come. They came in fast but not loud. The front door gave under a practiced shoulder, and within seconds, 2 officers were inside. I heard them before I saw them. Boots across the floor clipped instructions. The quick sweep of rooms. The laundry room door creaked open. I didn't lift my head. The air shifted. A flashlight cut across the floor and landed on me where I sat, curled against the dryer, wrapped in a blanket that hadn't been clean in days. A woman's voice, calm and low. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" I blinked. She crouched beside me and placed a hand on my shoulder. It was the first human touch I'd felt that wasn't clinical or cruel. I nodded once barely. Another officer moved past her into the kitchen. "The furnace is off," he called. Ovens cracked open. Probably trying to keep warm. Empty soup cans in the sink. Fridges almost bare. The woman helped me to my feet. My knees buckled and she steadied me. Bruising on the arms, the man said, reappearing. Thin. Maybe 15, 20 pounds under. He held something in his hand, a folder. IV kits. Logs. Notes. Daily symptoms tracked like clockwork. He looked over at me. He was documenting her decline. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My throat was too dry and too full at once. I let the blanket fall to my elbows as they led me outside. Snow had just begun to fall soft and slow, covering everything like it meant to bury what had happened. In the cruiser, I watched the reflection of my face in the window, sunken, unfamiliar, and held it there steady. Behind me, the house finally closed without echo. They found the folder in the top drawer of Bryce's dresser. A neatly labeled binder, plastic sleeves protecting printed spreadsheets. Officer Temple showed it to me the next morning, while I sat wrapped in a hospital blanket. My fingers curled around a paper cup of weak coffee I couldn't drink. Each page was methodical. Lists of providers' diagnostic codes, anticipated reimbursements. My name at the top of every form. There were notes beside each week. Refuse outing. Missed meal. Confused tone recorded. He'd been writing about me like I was a project, not a person. "He filed for in-home care stipends," she said gently. "Claimed he was your caregiver. There's even a second application pending, long-term disability support." I stared at the printouts, too stunned to feel anything. It wasn't just the money. It was how easy it had been. How quiet. Later that afternoon, a neighbor came forward. Mrs. Delaney, 2 doors down, gray sweater, clutched tight around her shoulders. She told the officer she'd heard something crying, maybe yelling 2 nights ago. "I thought it was the TV," she said, voice trembling. "He always had something on." Another man said he saw Bryce taking out trash in the middle of the night, bags that clinked like glass. No one thought to check. Not really. Not until the squad car lights painted the snow. I listened quietly as they gave their accounts, nodding, apologizing, justifying. And when it was done, I asked for the binder and placed it in my lap like something I had to carry. The hospital bed felt too clean, too quiet. I woke to the beeping of machines and the ache in my bones from weeks of curling into myself. My wrists were bruised where my own weight had pressed against hard surfaces. But I didn't feel pain. Just space. Empty. Echoing space. The social worker knocked before entering. I recognized her face, though I couldn't remember her name. She had been here before 2 years ago, after the first complaint someone filed. Back then, she said there wasn't enough to investigate. That I seemed fine. Now she sat gently at the edge of my bed, her clipboard silent in her lap. "I'm listening this time," she said. I told her everything. Slowly, carefully. The days. The pills. The door that never opened. She didn't interrupt. She just nodded once and let the silence fill the gaps. Officer Temple entered as I finished. She had her phone in hand. "Do you mind?" she asked. I nodded. She played the call. My voice shaky but deliberate, asking for pizza. Asking not to knock. The room didn't move. No one breathed. When it ended, she looked at me and said, "We believe you." And for the first time, I did too. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Bryce sat across the aisle in a pressed suit. His beard trimmed his expression. Blank. He barely looked at me. When he did, it was with something like pity, as if I were the one who'd lost everything. His attorney spoke first. "This is a case of confusion. Mental decline. A woman isolated by age, misinterpreting support as harm. I listened without blinking. She signed the forms. He continued. She allowed his care. She even thanked him in writing once. Her memory is inconsistent. She's admitted as much. When it was my turn, I didn't speak from the witness stand. I stood behind the podium, both hands gripping the paper I had folded and unfolded so many times. It had worn thin at the edges. I raised a son who grew into a man that learned to fake care. But not to feel it, I read. And for too long, I mistook survival for silence. But I am not confused. I am not paranoid. I was hungry. And I was locked in a room by someone who once called me Mom. When I finished, no one moved for a moment. The judge ruled within the hour. Full protective order. Criminal charges pending. He would not come near me again. That night I returned home. Bryce was gone. The lights felt too bright. The walls too still. But I stood in the kitchen, took the old pizza flyer from the drawer, and taped it to the fridge. Then I opened a fresh notebook, wrote one call away on the first page, and underlined it twice. 3 days later, a letter arrived from a woman in Michigan. Her son had done the same. She was never believed. I'm glad someone finally got out, she wrote. I stared at her words, then picked up my pen and wrote in steady strokes. It took hunger to be heard.